I loved my daughter-in-law as if she were my own daughter, but she never loved me like a mother. Because no one who truly loves you would make you sick with chronic illness. No one who loves you would steal your entire life savings to fund her luxury vacations. And the shocking secrets she hid behind my back will leave you speechless. So stay with me till the end, and don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment where you're watching from, my dear listeners. You won't believe what my daughter-in-law did next. That evening, the house was quiet, except for the ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. I sat in the living room, the scent of chamomile tea rising from the porcelain pot, my hands steady, though my heart was far from calm. If you see me sitting here so peacefully, know that I just lost every dollar I had saved for the rest of my life, and I am planning a revenge they will never forget. The soft lamplight brushed against the silver frame of my son's wedding photo, the only thing left untouched in this house. I watched the reflection tremble in my teacup, and for the first time in years, I felt something colder than fear. Moments later, the heavy sound of the front door burst through the silence. Claire's heels clicked frantically on the marble floor, followed by her mother's quick steps. They looked pale, as if death itself had followed them back from Bali. Claire's voice broke the still air, trembling yet full of accusation. "What did you do to us, Bethany?" Her mother's hands shook as she clutched her designer bag, eyes wide with disbelief. My house in Maine has always been my sanctuary, a wooden cottage facing the Atlantic, where mornings smell of pine and salt, and the wind hums through the shutters like an old friend. For 20 years, I wrote here quiet novels about family forgiveness and trust. It used to comfort me, the irony of writing about harmony while life stayed perfectly calm. I didn't know that soon those very words would turn against me, testing what I truly believed. I've lived alone since my husband Daniel passed away. He was a steady man, a reader, the one who believed in my stories before anyone else did. He left me this home, a modest stock portfolio in Penguin Publishing, and the savings account we built together, a little over $300,000. Enough to live peacefully, to host my Sunday book club, and to send small checks to local shelters under his name. Life was not grand, but it was honest. People in town know me as Bethany Foster, the writer who still signs her letters with ink instead of email. I read at the nursing home twice a month, always bringing muffins, because the nurses never have time to bake. The old men there call me the storyteller with the calm eyes. It's a simple reputation, and I've guarded it carefully. Trust once earned should be tended like a fragile flower. Then Peter got married. My only son, my pride, my reason for getting out of bed on dark winter mornings. When he brought Claire home for the first time, she wore white cashmere and perfume that smelled too expensive for her salary. Her smile was practiced, her words smooth as glass. I wanted to believe she loved him. Perhaps she did once. But it didn't take long before the rhythm of this house changed. At first, she came often under the excuse of helping me modernize the place. She rearranged furniture, replaced my tea tins with imported ones I couldn't pronounce, and criticized the way I folded my napkins. Then her mother, Phoebe Caldwell, started showing up too. A woman who spoke in compliments that felt like warnings. Before I knew it, my cozy home turned into a stage where I was no longer the main character. Every dinner conversation was a performance, every gesture a test. They called it caring. I called it surveillance. I noticed the way Claire checked my mail when she thought I wasn't looking, how Phoebe asked casual questions about my finances. Little things small enough to ignore, but heavy enough to leave bruises on my peace of mind. That's when I began writing less about trust and more about betrayal. It was unintentional at first. But now, looking back, I realize the story had already begun writing itself. Claire Caldwell was the kind of woman who made people smile just by walking into a room. At 33, with soft brown hair always pinned neatly, and a voice sweet enough to calm any parent at school, she had mastered the art of appearing perfect. As a high school teacher, she spoke about literature and kindness with that subtle confidence people mistake for sincerity. In church, she always volunteered to read verses. At family gatherings, she laughed at every joke, poured wine for everyone, and looked like the very definition of grace. To the world, she was the perfect daughter-in-law. To me, she was a question mark I could never quite erase. Her image of simplicity fooled many. She wore pastel sweaters, modest skirts, and shoes that looked humble until you saw the stitching. Burberry Tory Birch Kate Spade. She once told me they were gifts from her former students, tokens of appreciation from parents who adored her teaching. I nodded and smiled, but something in her tone didn't sit right. Teachers in Maine aren't usually showered with designer handbags. Claire had a way of speaking that slipped under your guard. She could turn any conversation into a lesson about self-love or emotional wellness. She talked about how women should reward themselves, how spending money was an act of empowerment, how life was too short to hoard savings for a future that might never come. The first few times I thought it was just her youthful perspective. But as the months went on, I realized it was something else, a slow persuasion, an ideology designed to make indulgence sound noble. Peter adored her. He said she made him feel alive again, that she helped him see the world differently. He started quoting her phrases, self-care, minimalism, freedom from guilt. I didn't argue. I just watched as little by little their lifestyle shifted. Vacations became investments in experience. New clothes became a form of self-expression. And credit cards turned into their own form of faith. There were moments when Claire looked at me with that calm, unreadable smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. I'd catch her studying me, my schedule, my habits, the way I kept my financial papers in a neat drawer by the study. She would compliment my discipline, then laugh softly, as if she found it charmingly old-fashioned. That was when I began to understand that charm could be a weapon and innocence could be an act. She knew exactly how to make people trust her, and that I thought was the most dangerous talent of all. 6 years of their marriage passed like a long performance that never changed its script. Claire always found a graceful way to delay motherhood. She said her body wasn't ready, that the demands of teaching and emotional burnout made it impossible to think about children. She spoke of freedom, of the modern woman's right to choose her own timing, and Peter, ever the considerate husband, nodded with understanding. What he didn't see was how often she used those same words to ask me for money, small amounts at first, wrapped in polite concern, always tied to something that sounded noble. A retreat for feminine energy, a healing workshop in Sedona, a yoga camp by the ocean. She claimed they helped her reconnect with herself, though the pictures she posted online showed champagne glasses and luxury resorts. Peter worked long weeks out of town managing construction sites across New England. He believed Claire stayed with me often to help around the house. He would call at night, his voice cheerful, thanking me for letting her care for you while I'm away. I didn't have the heart to tell him that she rarely lifted a hand here. She came, yes, but mostly to use my laundry machine and Wi-Fi before leaving for her next retreat. Every anniversary, I tried to be kind. I gave them small checks, a token gesture from a mother who wanted to support her son's marriage. Claire always replied with long, sugary messages that could have won awards for eloquence. She'd write about how grateful she felt for my generosity, how she saw me as a mentor, how she hoped to one day emulate my strength. I almost believed her until I began to notice the pattern. Each time she received money within a week, there would be a new set of travel photos: turquoise beaches, silk robes, spa candles. One afternoon, while cleaning the study, I found a brochure left behind, Awakening the Inner Goddess, 5 Days of Restorative Luxury. The price tag alone could have covered 3 months of my groceries. I sat there for a long time holding that glossy paper, realizing that the woman who preached simplicity was living a life funded by other people's goodwill. In my journal that night, I wrote what I couldn't say aloud. It's strange, I wrote, how the people who speak the most about positive energy are often the ones who leave you drained. It started subtly, the way rain begins with mist before turning into a storm. Claire said she only wanted to help me stay healthy. At first, it sounded thoughtful. She offered to plan my meals, claiming my old-fashioned diet wasn't balanced enough for someone my age. I didn't argue. I'd always been open to advice. But before I realized it, she was controlling every plate that landed on my table. She replaced my morning oatmeal with buttery croissants, my green tea with sweet smoothies, and she said it was all part of nourishing feminine energy. When I mentioned my low-sodium plan, she laughed gently and said older people should trust the younger generation to make better choices. That word trust began to taste bitter. Then came the doctor appointments. I'd had the same physician for 20 years, a careful man who knew my medical history better than anyone. One afternoon, when I called to confirm a checkup, the receptionist said it had been canceled by a family member. Claire's voice floated from the kitchen, cheerful as ever. She said there was no need to waste money on unnecessary visits, that she'd found an online wellness program that could replace them. I should have protested, but she was quick, confident, persuasive. Somehow, she made my hesitation feel like ungratefulness. She began cooking every meal herself, insisting it was her way of showing love. The food looked beautiful. Golden roasts, creamy soups, desserts dripping with honey. But after a few weeks, my body told a different story. I felt heavy, my head dizzy after meals, my skin dull. She said it was detox symptoms, that my body was just adjusting. I wanted to believe her, but the fatigue grew deeper, like fog settling inside me. One evening, I tried to take my daily vitamins. The simple act of reaching for the bottle made her appear beside me like a shadow. She smiled, that polite, practiced smile that never reached her eyes, and gently took the bottle from my hand. "Let me mix it with milk for you," she said softly. "It'll help your body absorb it better." I froze, watching the pills disappear into her palm. Her tone was affectionate, but something about the way she held that bottle made my stomach twist. Later that night, lying awake, I thought about the strange weight pressing on my chest lately. Not just the kind caused by food, but by something far quieter and more dangerous. Control rarely announces itself. It whispers through kindness until you forget what freedom feels like. At first, I blamed the winter. The long evenings, the early darkness, the heavy air of the Maine coast. But soon, the drowsiness became something else entirely. After dinner, my eyelids would grow so heavy I could barely make it to the armchair before sleep swallowed me whole. I used to stay up late editing manuscripts, yet now I couldn't even remember the names of characters I had created. It frightened me the way my own mind began to slip like sand through my fingers. One Sunday, I called Peter. I told him I'd been feeling strange lately, sleepy after meals, forgetful, sometimes dizzy. He laughed lightly and said I was overworked, that writing too much could tire the brain. He assured me Claire was taking good care of me and that I should relax more, maybe let her handle things for a while. His words, though meant to comfort, sounded like a door quietly closing between us. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the ticking clock loud against the silence. The house felt colder than usual, though the fireplace still burned. Loneliness is a peculiar thing. It doesn't come all at once. It seeps into corners, fills empty cups, hides in the sound of someone else's laughter. I realized I had stopped talking freely in my own home, measuring every word, afraid to seem suspicious or ungrateful. So I began to write not stories, but notes. I opened a new notebook, the kind Daniel once bought for me every Christmas, and started recording small details: what I ate, what time I felt dizzy, what words Claire said during meals. The act itself steadied me. I wrote about the color of the tea, the smell of her cooking, the pills she mixed with milk. I didn't know what I was searching for, only that writing was the one thing still truly mine. Some nights, I wondered if I was imagining it all. Maybe old age was finally catching up to me. Maybe grief and isolation had turned me paranoid. But then as I looked at my own handwriting under the lamplight, the careful record of days and doses and smiles, too perfect to be kind, something in me whispered otherwise. I didn't realize it then, but those quiet pages were no longer just notes. They were evidence, each word a breadcrumb, leading toward the truth I was too afraid to name. It began with the food. I used to enjoy the smell of dinner drifting from the kitchen, the warmth of butter and herbs reminding me of family gatherings long gone. But now, every meal seemed to blur my thoughts. After just a few bites, my eyelids would grow heavy, my mind foggy, my fingers unable to find the right words on the page. The strange thing was that it always happened after Claire's special dishes, the ones she said were full of nutrients for women of wisdom. I wanted to believe her, but the timing felt too precise to ignore. When I asked what she put in the meals, she smiled with that soft, polished tone of hers, the kind that sounds caring, but leaves no room for argument. "You shouldn't worry so much," she said, brushing crumbs from the tablecloth. "Just rest and let me take care of everything." The phrase repeated itself like a lullaby I didn't want to hear. "Let me take care of everything" sounded less like kindness and more like a warning. Days turned into weeks, and I began keeping a quiet distance. I ate less, sometimes pretending to finish my plate when she wasn't looking. But even then, the fatigue crept in. My writing slowed. My thoughts drifted mid-sentence. The house that once felt alive with words now felt like it was listening, waiting for me to slip. Then came the night I woke to the sound of footsteps. It was well past midnight, the kind of silence where even the ocean outside seemed to hold its breath. I got out of bed and moved quietly to the hallway. From the dim light of the kitchen, I saw Claire standing by the counter. Her robe perfectly tied her hair neat, as if she'd been preparing for an audience. She was stirring something thick and golden into a jar of honey. When I asked what she was doing, she turned, smiling gently as always. "Making you some calming tea, Mother. You've been so restless lately." Her voice was calm, but her hand covered the label on the jar as she spoke. Something in me froze. I nodded and returned to my room, pretending to believe her. But my heartbeat didn't slow until I locked the door. That night I sat awake until dawn, watching the first light crawl across the wooden walls of my home. The word home suddenly felt misplaced. The walls still stood. The fireplace still burned, but the air had changed. Every kindness now felt rehearsed, every gesture too precise. From that moment on, I understood this wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was a stage, and I had unknowingly been cast in someone else's performance. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was still and cold, the smell of last night's soup lingering faintly in the air. I stood by the counter staring at the half-empty bowl Claire had left covered, and something inside me hardened. My hands moved almost without thought. I poured the remaining soup into an empty mineral water bottle, tightened the cap, and slipped it into my handbag. The act felt both shameful and necessary, like crossing a line between suspicion and proof. By mid-morning, I was standing in front of the local toxicology lab, a small brick building near the harbor. The receptionist asked what I wanted to test. I told her it was a sample of homemade food, something I had prepared myself. She didn't ask further. My voice sounded calm, but my heart pounded as I handed over the bottle, still faintly warm. I left my phone number and waited in the car, watching the sea mist roll over the parking lot, feeling a kind of fear that had no name. When the pharmacist finally called me that afternoon, her tone was careful. "Mrs. Foster." She said we found traces of diphenhydramine, that's an antihistamine sometimes used as a sedative. And there's also a very small amount of scopolamine. It's rare, usually used in microdoses for motion sickness or certain psychiatric treatments. But prolonged exposure, she paused. It could cause disorientation or temporary memory loss. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world outside my car window blurred into gray. She suggested I contact the police immediately, but I thanked her quietly and said I would handle it myself. The truth was, I didn't want intervention, not yet. I needed to understand who Claire really was, what she wanted, and how far she was willing to go. That night, I opened my notebook again. I began to record everything, the date, the dishes, my symptoms, and her exact words at dinner. Each entry was deliberate, written like evidence for a trial that hadn't yet begun. My handwriting trembled at first, then steadied as I wrote. I wasn't ready to confront her, not until I could strike with certainty. Revenge, I reminded myself, was not about rage. It was about patience. That afternoon, I decided to test her. The sun was slanting through the kitchen window, soft and golden, the kind of light that used to calm me. But lately, even the warmth of Maine felt sharp, like glass catching fire. I was sitting at the table, pretending to organize my bills, when Claire came in humming to herself, her perfume lingering behind her like smoke. I sighed softly and said almost absent-mindedly that I must be getting forgetful these days. Then I added, as if it had just occurred to me, that I couldn't seem to remember the code to my safe anymore. I said it in the same tone one might use when forgetting where they put their glasses. My eyes never left her face. For a second, her expression didn't move. Then, ever so slightly, her smile flickered wider. "Oh, no, really," she said lightly, her voice lined with false concern. "You mean the one in your study? That must be frustrating, Mother." Her tone was playful, but her eyes gave her away a quick flash, sharp and alert. She began asking questions in rapid succession. "Are you sure you forgot it? When was the last time you opened it? Maybe I can help you think it through." Sometimes saying the numbers out loud helps. She said it kindly, as if she wanted to help, but her eagerness betrayed her. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. I gave vague answers, pretending to be confused, fumbling with imaginary numbers, then changed the subject to something trivial, like the neighbor's new puppy. She smiled, though the muscles in her jaw tightened. I knew she realized I was holding something back. Over the next few days, her demeanor changed. The easy warmth she usually performed began to cool. She stopped leaving me little wellness notes on the counter, stopped offering to make my tea. Her eyes followed me more carefully now, not with affection, but with quiet suspicion. She no longer asked how I slept, only watched how steady my hands were when I reached for my cup. That night I sat by my desk, the lamp casting a thin circle of light on my journal. I wrote slowly, deliberately, each word like a step in a minefield. She knows I'm not as weak as she thought I wrote, and now she's planning her next move. I closed the notebook, listening to the creaks of the old house around me. Outside, the ocean roared softly, like a warning. That morning I told myself I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a writer gathering evidence that made it easier to breathe. At the electronics shop downtown, I pretended to be the same quiet, polite woman everyone thought I was. The young clerk showed me a row of tiny cameras, barely larger than shirt buttons. I chose two, one disguised as a vase ornament, another hidden inside a photo frame with a built-in cloud connection. "Research for my next crime novel," I told him with a smile. He laughed, not knowing how close that was to the truth. That afternoon, while Claire was out for her yoga class, I set everything up. One camera in the ceramic vase on the bookshelf angled toward the living room couch. The second inside the frame by the fireplace, the one that held my husband's picture. It felt strange using Daniel's photo as cover, but I whispered an apology to him and kept working. When the devices blinked green, I felt a pulse of fear and power all at once. For the first time in months, I wasn't blind. When Claire came home, I acted casual. I told her I was collecting details for a story about psychological manipulation, a widow slowly realizing she's being deceived by someone she trusts. She laughed softly, called it so dark but very Bethany. I smiled back, pretending to jot notes while watching her reflection in the glass cabinet. Every gesture of hers felt rehearsed now, every word calculated. That night, after pretending to go to bed, I sat in my study with my laptop open, headphones plugged in. The cameras streamed live to the cloud account I'd created under a false name. At first, nothing happened. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood. Then close to midnight movement flickered across the screen. Claire entered the living room barefoot, still in her silk robe. She closed the curtains carefully one by one, making sure no light escaped. Then she placed a small silver pendulum on the coffee table, the kind hypnotists used in old films. She leaned forward, her face calm, almost tender, and began to whisper. "Remember, the code is..." I froze. From the speakers came another voice, my own. Soft, sleepy, unmistakable. It was me reciting the 6-digit number to my safe. The sound of my voice, obedient and dull, made my stomach turn. She'd been hypnotizing me. That was how she knew. My hand trembled as I stopped the recording. The woman on the screen smiled, faintly, pocketed the pendulum, and walked away. The house fell silent again, but inside me something had shifted forever. The fear remained, but beneath it, a spark of resolve began to burn. It happened late at night while the wind battered against the windows and the sea groaned beyond the cliffs. Claire moved quietly through the house barefoot, her robe brushing the wooden floor like a whisper. She went straight to the study, pausing once to glance down the hall, her expression calm and deliberate. The small silver pendulum she had used before lay on the table beside her, a cruel reminder of what she had done. She knelt in front of the safe and entered the 6-digit code. With ease, my voice had given it to her word for word. When the lock clicked open, she exhaled with quiet satisfaction. Inside were stacks of cash savings bonds, certificates from Penguin Publishing, and Daniel's old stock documents. She began packing them into a leather tote, moving with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Then she wiped the keypad, the handles, and even the edge of the desk, removing every trace of her touch. She didn't know that the tiny lens hidden inside the picture frame above the fireplace was watching everything, streaming each second to the cloud. By dawn, I woke with an empty head and a heavy heart. My body still felt sluggish, but my mind, for the first time, was sharp. I walked into the study and saw the open safe, nothing left but the faint smell of metal and paper. Claire appeared seconds later, clutching her phone, eyes wide in practiced shock. "Mother, someone must have broken in. I just found the door unlocked." I didn't answer. I looked at her face, the trembling lower lip, the tears ready to fall on command. And for a moment, I almost admired her performance. Almost. Then I turned away, walked calmly to my room, and closed the door. My hands didn't shake as I plugged in the hard drive and downloaded the footage from the cloud server. Every frame, every motion, every stolen glance was there, undeniable, irreversible. After saving the files, I picked up the phone and called Ivy Sanders. Ivy had once been one of my husband's brightest law students, and she'd dedicated her career to protecting seniors from financial exploitation. When she answered, her voice was clear and firm, just as I remembered. I told her only one sentence. "It's time I tell you a story, Ivy, and this one's real." She asked if I wanted to report it immediately. I said no. If I called the police now, Claire might twist it into a tale of psychological disorder, claim she never meant harm. No, this story needed a different ending. I had to let her believe she was still in control long enough to hang herself with her own lies. That morning, I sat by the window, the sunlight washing over my trembling hands. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. The footage began innocently enough, just the soft click of a door and the faint creak of floorboards. But as the video played, the illusion of normalcy shattered. There was Claire standing in front of my safe, her face calm, focused, the same expression she used when pretending to help me find my reading glasses. Her lips moved slowly, repeating the very numbers I had mumbled under hypnosis. My voice, hollow and distant, echoed through the speakers, the 6 digits I had sworn to never forget. Hearing myself betray my own secret felt like being buried alive. On screen, the safe opened with a muted click. Claire exhaled in triumph, her reflection flashing in the metal door. She reached inside with gloved hands, stacking the envelopes of cash, the savings certificates, the stock documents, everything Daniel and I had built over a lifetime. Then she found the small velvet box, the one holding my mother's wedding ring, and a pair of pearl earrings Daniel gave me on our 20th anniversary. She opened it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Perfect." I watched as she worked with precision. She wiped every surface with disinfectant wipes, careful to remove even the faintest fingerprint. Then she pulled out her phone and photographed each document, my original savings records, stock certificates, and bank statements, all the evidence she would later use to forge new ownership forms. Her method was clinical practice. This wasn't the act of desperation I once mistook for selfishness. It was strategy. It was intent. The camera caught everything, even the smallest details: the silver pendant swinging against her collarbone, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the flicker of greed that softened into relief. She stood up, looked around one last time, and pressed her phone to her ear. Her voice was low but clear. "Mom, we're finally free," she said, her tone bright, almost giddy. "No more debts, no more begging. Phoebe." So that was the plan. The mother-daughter duo who played saints at Sunday brunch had been plotting this for months, maybe years. The realization hit harder than the loss itself. They hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen my son's trust, my peace, my sense of safety. By the time the video ended, I couldn't move. The room seemed to tilt. My reflection in the laptop screen looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, a woman who had been too kind for too long. I closed the laptop, my fingers trembling, but my heart had gone cold. This was no longer about money. This was war. The next morning, the house buzzed with a strange, artificial calm. Claire stood in the kitchen, her suitcase already by the door, speaking in that polished, gentle tone she always used when she wanted to sound innocent. She told Peter that she and her mother were leaving for a wellness trip, just a little escape to reset my energy. She said I needed quiet time to finish my next book, that solitude helped my creativity. Peter believed every word. He kissed her on the forehead, told her she deserved it, and promised to check on me later in the week. It broke my heart to see how easily she played him. By noon, Claire and Phoebe were boarding their first-class flight to Bali. The two of them looked every bit the picture of success. Linen suits, designer sunglasses, matching tote bags. Phoebe laughed loudly at the gate, her arm looped through her daughter's, unaware that in her rush to leave she had forgotten to lock the front door of her house in Ohio. It would be a small mistake with large consequences, though neither of them knew it yet. Once in Bali, their social media lit up like fireworks. Photos of infinity pools, champagne breakfasts, and spa treatments filled their feeds. In one post, Claire posed on a terrace overlooking the ocean, cocktail in hand, captioning it, "We deserve this life." The image gathered hundreds of likes from former students, colleagues, and friends, all praising her hard work and inspiring positivity. Even Peter commented a string of heart emojis proud of the woman he thought was healing her soul. They spent their days wrapped in silk robes, laughing by the pool, sipping from golden-rimmed glasses. Phoebe gushed about finally being free from worry, while Claire made grand plans for a new lifestyle, one that included investing their newfound wealth and helping Peter's career. They toasted to freedom without realizing their freedom was built on stolen breath, the savings of a woman who had trusted them both. The irony was cruel. Every massage, every glass of imported wine, every flight upgrade had been paid for by the very account Claire had drained, the account labeled Daniel's Legacy. She had used my husband's name, my years of patience and work, to fund her illusion of success. While they floated in turquoise waters and smiled for cameras, the cloud footage remained quietly stored thousands of miles away, time-stamped and backed up. Their laughter, their careless joy, their public display of triumph, all of it would soon serve as evidence. But for now, they believed they had won. I woke that morning to a light so thin it seemed to scrape the edges of the curtains, and the whole house felt like a held breath. The safe in my study yawned open and empty, the metal cold and honest, where paper and certificates had lived for years. For a moment, I felt something like relief, as if an ache had simply been made plain. I did not cry. I did not call out. I walked to the kettle and put water on for chamomile because small rituals keep the world steady. I brewed the tea, set the cup beside my laptop, and sat down as if I were beginning a chapter. The calm helped me think straight. I plugged in a thumb drive and copied the cloud footage I had already stored in secret. Then I copied it again to an external hard drive, and once more to a small USB I kept in my jewelry box. Each click felt measured and deliberate. I watched Claire move in the frame, the economy of her steps, the way she wiped the safe, the gloves, the photographs, the quiet phone call with the words that made my blood chill. The footage sat there on the screen, mute evidence that could not be unmade. After I finished saving the files, I opened my journal and wrote a single line in careful script that did not wobble, though my hands felt older than they had yesterday. I will not call the police yet. Not now. The boldness of thieves makes them careless. Then I called Ivy Sanders. The sound of her voice on the first ring was the sound of a courthouse I trusted, of someone who had taught law with her sleeves rolled up and whose lectures had once felt like light. I told her what I had, and I sent the file. She watched the footage, and I could hear the way her breathing changed through the phone. When she finally spoke, she did not raise her voice. Her words were precise and clear, the kind of words lawyers use to turn chaos into strategy. "Beth," she said, "this is felony theft, combined with elder financial exploitation and coercive control. We can make this stick. We can bring criminal charges and civil remedies and freeze accounts." I listened and felt something old and heavy begin to lift. Ivy asked if I wanted to file a complaint immediately. I said no. If we call the police now, she warned, Claire might spin a story of confusion or psychiatric episode and lean on a defense of reduced capacity. I needed more than a report. I needed a net. So we planned instead. Ivy would prepare a temporary restraining order and a preservation letter to banks and brokerages. She would quietly notify financial institutions under confidentiality so transfers could be traced and halted if possible. We would nod to the law without rattling the accused into hiding a trail. When I hung up, I sat very still with my cup cooling beside me. The house was the same house, and yet nothing about it felt private anymore. I had been violated, yes, but I was not broken. The theft had been brutal and intimate, but it had also given me something I had been missing for a long time. It had focused my mind, sharpened my purpose. I took a pencil, turned to a fresh page in my journal, and began to write the account in the plainest terms I knew how, because facts arranged patiently are the kindest form of revenge. Ivy called that afternoon, and I could hear the city traffic through her office window as she spoke with the clipped, efficient rhythm of someone who had spent a lifetime in courtrooms. She told me she had pulled a credit report and a string of bank records, and the numbers fell into place like snapping bones. Claire had more than $48,000 of credit card debt purchases at boutiques, luxury travel bookings, and an array of charges that did not match a teacher's salary. The ledger read like a private life I did not recognize, a life paid for, with bills I once trusted. Ivy said she had dug into Phoebe Caldwell as well, and found an old complaint in the county files about alleged theft of garden ornaments and antiques from a neighbor. The case had been closed for lack of direct evidence, but the pattern was there, a faint line connecting past behavior to present audacity. She paused, the kind of quiet that meant she was sorting the legal strategy. Then she said she had found something more alarming. Claire had opened a new credit account in my name using my social number and a forged signature. Someone had taken the liberty of signing my name to a contract while I slept in my own home. Ivy explained the legal weight of that finding in plain terms. This was not merely a family quarrel. This was identity theft and elder exploitation crimes with teeth. She told me she could file criminal referrals, seek emergency asset freezes, and file civil suits to recover the money. Her list of remedies was long and promising and terrifying all at once. I listened and felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. The documents proved what I had feared and what my journal had whispered. The house of kindness they had rebuilt with genial smiles and borrowed phrases was a sham constructed to funnel funds into a vacation fantasy. Ivy then offered a piece of advice that startled me with its cold clarity. "Do not call the police yet," she said. "Let them spend the money. Let them fly and drink and post and believe themselves untouchable. When the accounts are emptied and the paper trail leads from the safe to Bali to a shell of purchases and transfers, they will have less room to argue that this was a confusion or a mistake." She explained how eager thieves become sloppy when they are flush. Evidence multiplies when criminals assume impunity. Hearing that, I felt the old familiar ache that had lived in my chest since Daniel died. Then that ache changed shape into something sharper. Patience was a weapon. Planning was justice. Ivy would draft letters to banks to preserve records, quietly notify brokerages to place holds if possible, and prepare the papers needed to seek immediate court intervention once the pattern had fully revealed itself. I told her to move fast and to move quietly. After we hung up, I walked the rooms of my house like someone surveying a property that had been betrayed. The sunlight lay across the floorboards, and for the first time in months, I felt an odd warmth. There was work to do and a truth to lay bare, and I was no longer the one who woke to polite smiles and empty safes. 3 days after their flight to Bali, karma moved faster than any of us expected. In Cleveland, Ohio, Phoebe's white colonial house stood silent and unlocked the front door, slightly ajar curtains, fluttering in the wind. In her excitement to leave for paradise, she had forgotten one simple thing to turn the key. The neighborhood was quiet that week. Most residents away for the holiday, and by the second night, a group of thieves noticed the easy opportunity. They slipped inside, took everything that gleamed: jewelry boxes, antique vases, electronics, even the silver serving set she bragged about inheriting from her grandmother. By the time the police were called, the house had been stripped bare. Drawers yanked open. Closets emptied the living room, a landscape of overturned furniture. But what made the case unusual was what the burglars left behind: a pile of old boxes in the basement, filled with decorative items labeled with masking tape. A ceramic bird, a bronze garden frog, a porcelain clock. Each bore a small property tag with other people's names. When detectives cross-referenced the items, they realized they matched evidence from multiple unsolved neighborhood thefts from 2 years earlier, petty crimes everyone had forgotten except the victims. Suddenly, Phoebe Caldwell's name resurfaced in the local database. The irony was almost poetic. While she floated somewhere above the Indian Ocean sipping champagne, her own home had become a crime scene, one that pointed back at her. Within 24 hours, local police contacted federal investigators suspecting a pattern of interstate theft and property concealment. What began as a routine break-in turned into an inquiry that reached much higher than anyone had imagined. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Ivy. Just one line: "The FBI is looking into their property now." I read it twice, the words glowing faintly on the screen, like the spark of something inevitable. Then I set the phone down beside my teacup and smiled, not with triumph, but with recognition. Karma doesn't need my help, I whispered to myself. It's already awake. Outside, the wind shifted over the Maine coast, cold and steady, brushing through the pines. For the first time in months, I felt the world correcting itself quietly, efficiently, without my interference. There was a strange comfort in knowing justice had its own rhythm, one that didn't need my hand to turn the wheel. I closed my journal that night with a sense of calm I hadn't felt since before all this began. The story wasn't over, but I could already hear its ending forming steady as a heartbeat. I drove to Ivy's office that morning with the sea still misting over the road, the horizon gray and heavy like a secret. The back seat of my car held a box of quiet truth: the printed bank statements, my handwritten journal, and the 2 hard drives containing every second of video evidence. I parked outside the brick law building and sat for a moment watching people hurry past with coffee cups and umbrellas, their lives untouched by deceit. Then I took a breath and carried the box inside. Ivy Sanders greeted me at the door herself. She hadn't changed much since the days she used to visit our house as one of Daniel's law students, sharp, calm, with a voice that could cut through chaos without ever raising. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and ink. When I laid the evidence on her desk, she studied it without a word, her lawyer's mind already at work before I even finished explaining. I showed her the recordings first, Claire unlocking the safe, counting the cash, whispering into the phone. Ivy leaned forward, pausing the video at key moments, eyes narrowing as she took notes. When the footage ended, she exhaled slowly. "Beth," she said, her tone low but firm, "this isn't just theft. This is criminal exploitation, psychological manipulation, financial coercion, and fraud. Under elder protection law, she's looking at felony charges, maybe more." I nodded, though the words still stung. "She thought she could bury me under my own trust," I said quietly. Ivy gave a small, knowing smile. "Then we dig her out piece by piece." Within the hour, Ivy drafted and submitted a formal report to the local police department, attaching the evidence logs and certified time-stamped videos. She also filed an emergency request to freeze any accounts linked to Claire's transactions, routing the documents through both state and federal systems. The precision with which she worked reminded me of Daniel, steady, careful, methodical. I sat across from her, feeling something between grief and relief. When the paperwork was done, she turned to me. "We play this smart," she said. "No confrontation, no warning. Let her think she's safe. The arrogant ones always reveal themselves when they think they've won." We spent the next 2 hours outlining every step, gathering new records from the bank, tracing wire transfers to Bali, cross-referencing timestamps from airport customs data, and documenting my medical symptoms from the period when she had been drugging me. Every note became a thread in the web we were quietly weaving. As I left her office, Ivy clasped my hand and said, "You're stronger than she knows." Driving home, I felt the same cold wind I had felt the day everything started. But this time, it didn't chill me. It sharpened me. When the Ohio police arrived at the Caldwell residence, they didn't expect the scene that awaited them. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, chaos had swallowed the place, whole shattered glass across the carpet, overturned furniture, and drawers spilled open, like someone had tried to erase a life in a hurry. The living room looked less like a robbery and more like a reckoning. Among the wreckage, officers found dozens of strange items piled together: trinkets, figurines, pieces of jewelry, and porcelain ornaments, none of which seemed to belong in the same home. Detective Lawson, a 30-year veteran, was the first to notice the computer sitting half buried under a pile of clothes in the study. The hard drive had been wiped clean, its screen cracked, but the IT technician on site managed to recover fragments of deleted files. What emerged shocked everyone: a detailed spreadsheet outlining the division of stolen funds between C and P, clearly referring to Claire and Phoebe. Each entry matched the bank withdrawals from Bethany Foster's accounts down to the exact dollar. One line read simply, "Wire to Bali, 47,000 Claire's share." As the technicians dug deeper, they uncovered even more damning evidence. Hidden in a folder labeled Household Taxes, they found photographs of Bethany's bank statements, scans of her signature, and a series of forged documents prepared for what appeared to be false investment accounts. Another file, an Excel sheet titled Financial Plan 2025, contained notes about laundering funds through overseas transfers, along with reminders like "Keep Peter calm," "He must believe she's sick," and "Delete messages every 48 HRs." It wasn't just theft anymore. It was organized fraud. But the greatest surprise came from the pile of debris near the fireplace. While cataloging evidence, an officer pulled out a velvet box containing earrings engraved with the initials LM, not belonging to anyone in the Caldwell family. Soon, more items followed: a silver candlestick with a neighbor's address tag, an antique brooch listed in a theft report from 2 years earlier, and a small crystal figurine someone had once reported missing. The realization settled heavily over the room. Phoebe Caldwell hadn't just been a manipulator. She had been a thief long before this. By the end of the day, the officers filled 3 boxes with seized evidence, financial documents, jewelry, hard drives, and personal notes. Detective Lawson looked at the mess and muttered quietly. They thought they were smart, but greed always leaves fingerprints. Ivy worked like a storm in slow motion, quiet, methodical, but unstoppable. Within days, she assembled a legal team that moved through every document, transaction, and timestamp like surgeons tracing a heartbeat. She hired a forensic accountant from Boston, a gray-haired man named Samuel Price, who had spent 20 years uncovering corporate embezzlement. Together, they built a timeline that turned chaos into proof. Every withdrawal from Bethany's account had to match the date Claire bought the airline tickets, the hotel invoices from Bali, the restaurant receipts, and even the social media photos where she tagged locations with glowing captions like "Healing in Paradise." Each image became a nail in her own coffin. Once the pattern was airtight, Ivy filed a subpoena duces tecum, a formal legal request, compelling both the bank and the airline to release their internal records. The documents arrived in thick envelopes: transaction slips, ATM camera footage, IP logs showing the exact computer Claire used to book the flights. Even the timestamp from the ticket purchase matched the moment caught on the surveillance camera at the airport check-in counter. The digital trail was perfect, clean, and damning. Meanwhile, Ivy coordinated with Bethany's physician to obtain the full medical report from the months Claire had lived in the house. The lab results showed traces of diphenhydramine and scopolamine, the very substances found earlier in the soup sample. These compounds were known to cause confusion, fatigue, and memory impairment when administered repeatedly. Ivy highlighted the toxicology findings in bold and cross-referenced them with the time Bethany's journal described her symptoms. That connection transformed the case from theft to elder abuse and mental manipulation, a category of felony that carried far heavier sentencing. Ivy's office became a war room. Files lined every wall, each one labeled with a number and a date. She reviewed the police reports from Ohio, the recovered Excel files from Phoebe's computer, and the forensic accounting summary. When she was finally satisfied, she looked up at me and said, "Beth, this isn't just evidence, this is a conviction waiting to happen." By the end of the week, Ivy compiled the complete file into a formal brief for the district attorney's office. The binder contained 100 pages of exhibits, photographs, financial charts, medical reports, and sworn witness statements. It was enough for the DA to open a case and issue a preliminary order for criminal prosecution. When I asked Ivy if we were ready, she smiled, her voice calm but certain. "We're beyond ready. We're in control now. The law is finally on your side." When Peter arrived that afternoon, he still believed there had to be a mistake. His voice trembled when he called through the door. "Mom, what's going on?" I led him into the living room, the same room where Claire once served tea and smiled like innocence itself. The air felt different now, heavier, as if the house itself knew what was coming. I motioned for him to sit and opened my laptop. The blue light flickered across his face as I pressed play. The video began in silence. Claire stood before me in the frame, her voice low and deliberate, swinging a silver pendant back and forth. "You're tired, Mother," she whispered on screen. "Just relax. Repeat after me." Then came my voice, dull and obedient, reciting 6 numbers. The safe code. The one I never told anyone. Peter's eyes widened. His hand moved to his mouth. When the recording showed her kneeling to open the safe and counting the cash, he gasped as if struck. "No," he whispered. No, she wouldn't. But there was no room left for denial. The evidence spoke more clearly than either of us ever could. He sank into the couch, his face pale, shoulders trembling. I could see the moment his world cracked. The trust, the marriage, the belief that love made people good, it all fractured right in front of him. I wanted to reach out to tell him I understood, but this truth wasn't mine to soften. Some truths need to sting before they heal. Ivy sat beside him, calm and composed, her legal binder open on her lap. "Peter," she said gently but firmly, "what your wife did qualifies as felony theft and elder exploitation. But you have an opportunity here. If you cooperate with the investigation, we can prove you had no involvement. You can protect yourself and help your mother." Peter buried his face in his hands. His voice cracked. "I believed she loved us, both of us." I looked at him quietly. "Love doesn't steal," I said. "And kindness doesn't mean letting someone walk over you." My tone wasn't angry, just final. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the laptop fan. Then Peter looked up, tears streaking down his face, and nodded slowly. "Tell me what I need to do," he said. I closed the laptop, feeling both heartbreak and something colder, a sense of justice taking its first breath. The plan we built with Ivy wasn't loud or dramatic. It was patient, the kind of patience that cuts deeper than anger. We decided not to alert Claire. She would continue believing that everything was under control, that her little web of lies still held. Let her post her smiling photos, drink her imported wine, and plan her next wellness retreat. The longer she thought she was safe, the more mistakes she would make. Ivy called it strategic silence. Every few days, she checked the linked financial accounts. Each movement left a digital footprint: withdrawals, transfers, purchases from online boutiques in Bali. We logged them all, matching timestamps with receipts and card authorizations. "We need one more illegal transaction," Ivy said, her voice calm but focused, "something that ties her to interstate activity, that will lock in federal charges." I agreed. There was a strange satisfaction in letting her own greed do the work for us. At night, I sat at my desk with a cup of tea, reading through the case file Ivy sent me. It was thick, now statements, recovered files, and a growing list of witnesses. Peter had given a formal deposition confirming Claire's access to my accounts. His testimony added a painful but necessary piece of truth. Justice, I was learning, was rarely gentle. Then one morning, Ivy called with a tone that told me something had shifted. "Beth," she said, "the Ohio police just sent a report. They found a hard drive in Phoebe's house." I could hear papers shuffling on her end, the quick rhythm of a lawyer piecing things together. "It contains full data on their theft operations, spreadsheets, receipts, and photos of stolen property. And more than that evidence, Phoebe was selling stolen goods online under an alias." I closed my eyes and let the words settle. It wasn't triumph I felt, but inevitability. Karma was doing her quiet work. The seeds they had planted, the greed, the deceit, the arrogance, were blooming in full view of the law. Ivy's voice softened. "This changes everything. Once we cross-check the recovered drive with your case file, we'll have an airtight prosecution. Claire won't be able to hide behind ignorance or her mother's shadow. This connects them both." I looked out the window. The sea stretched wide and calm gray with early light. For the first time in months, I breathed without the weight pressing on my chest. "Let's keep watching," I said. "When karma blossoms, I want her to see it herself." 3 days after the Ohio police released the results of their investigation, the storm finally broke. The morning news ran the story before dawn: mother and daughter under federal investigation for elder exploitation and financial fraud. Their names, Claire Caldwell and Phoebe Caldwell, flashed across every network. By noon, their resort in Bali confirmed to authorities that they had abruptly checked out and boarded the first flight home. When the taxi pulled up in front of my house, I could already hear the panic through the car doors. Claire stumbled out first, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from crying. Phoebe followed close behind, dragging her suitcase half open, the handle broken. Both looked like ghosts who had finally realized their haunting was over. They burst into the house without knocking. The air shifted sharp and electric. Claire's voice cracked as she screamed, "What did you do to us?" Her finger trembled, pointing straight at me as if I were the one who'd emptied my own safe, forged my own name, and poisoned my own tea. Phoebe stood behind her, clutching her chest, her breath shallow and uneven. I didn't move. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, my favorite teapot steaming gently beside me. My hands didn't shake as I lifted the cup. I took a slow sip and looked at them. These women who had called me family while planning my ruin. "What did I do?" I said quietly, setting the cup down. "Nothing at all. I just let justice do its work." For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the silence, steady and indifferent. Claire blinked rapidly, her expression shifting between disbelief and fury. "They froze everything," she cried. "The bank, the accounts, even my school called this morning. They said the FBI asked for my employment records." Phoebe gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "My house is sealed. They took my computers," she gasped, voice trembling. Ivy, who had arrived earlier and now stood quietly in the doorway, spoke for the first time. "That's standard procedure during a federal investigation," she said evenly. "You should know all the evidence came from your own files." Phoebe turned toward her eyes wide. You set us up. Ivy shook her head. No, she said you did that yourself. The silence that followed was almost holy. Claire sank into a chair, her breath coming in uneven bursts, tears streaking down her cheeks. Phoebe covered her face with both hands, whispering something about bad luck and betrayal. I rose from my seat, calm as ever. You both spent so much time pretending to be victims, I said softly. Now you finally get to feel what that's like. From behind the staircase, a voice cut through the heavy silence. Enough! Both women turned at once. Peter stepped into the light, his face pale, his jaw set in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy, learning how to face the truth. In his trembling hand, he held his phone, the screen glowing. You want to know what happened? He said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. Here, look. He turned the screen toward them. The image was clear. Phoebe's white colonial house wrapped in bright yellow tape, bold black letters screaming, "Under investigation, FBI property." The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation glinted under the morning sun. The photo wasn't from a newspaper or a stranger. It was taken by Peter himself minutes after returning from the airport. Phoebe gasped, as if struck. No, that's impossible, she whispered, her hands shaking. They can't. But before she could finish, the television in the living room flickered to life. Ivy had switched on the local news channel. A reporter stood in front of the same house, microphone in hand, the yellow tape fluttering behind her. Breaking news, the anchor's voice declared. 2 women are under federal investigation for their alleged connection to a string of thefts and financial crimes spanning multiple counties in Ohio. As the footage played, the camera zoomed in on tables full of recovered evidence jewelry, silverware, garden ornaments, and antique collectibles. The items were arranged neatly, each tagged with case numbers. Then came the detail that froze Claire where she stood. Several of those objects were the same ones she and Phoebe had once shown off online, smiling proudly beside them. On the corner of the screen, an old photo from Phoebe's Facebook page appeared, showing her holding a porcelain clock. The same clock now sat in an evidence bag labeled Recovered Property Number 47. Claire's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes darted from the TV to Peter to me and back again, desperate for a lie that could still work. But there was none left. Peter's voice broke the silence. It wasn't loud, it didn't have to be. You lied to her, he said, his gaze fixed on Claire. You lied to me. And now the whole country knows the truth. For a moment, no one breathed. The only sound was the TV reporter's voice continuing faintly in the background. Authorities confirm additional evidence links the suspects to elder financial exploitation, a crime that carries a federal sentence. Claire sank into the nearest chair, her face drained of color. Phoebe whispered something about lawyers, but her words dissolved into air. I looked at my son, his shoulders shaking, tears pooling in his eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw clarity in his expression. The fog had lifted. The truth at last was visible to everyone. Claire broke first. The weight of the headlines, the frozen accounts, and Peter's hollow stare shattered whatever composure she had left. Her knees buckled as she fell to the floor, hands clutching the hem of her blouse. I didn't mean to, she sobbed. I swear I didn't. Mom made me do it. She said it was just temporary. Just until things got better. Her voice cracked, desperate, reaching for pity. But before anyone could respond, Phoebe's expression twisted into rage. Don't you dare blame me, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're the one who took the money. You're the one who opened the damn account. The room erupted. The calm that had filled the house moments earlier splintered into chaos. They shouted over each other, trading accusations like venom. Claire screamed about being manipulated. Phoebe countered with stories of Claire forging signatures, lying about investments, and keeping more than her share. It was like watching two wolves turn on each other after a long hunt. Every word peeled back another layer of their scheme: the falsified stock documents, the fake transfer slips, the shadow accounts registered under false names. I didn't move. I sat perfectly still at the table, my fingers resting on the rim of my teacup. From the hallway, Ivy's small recording device blinked faintly. She was in the next room, listening every confession, every accusation, every reckless word captured cleanly on tape. Phoebe slammed her hand on the table. "You think you're innocent," she spat. "You forged the damn paperwork. You said your husband was too stupid to check." Claire's face contorted, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You told me it was safe," she cried. "You said Bethany was too old to notice. You promised." And then she turned toward me, her voice rising into a shriek. "You planned this. You set us up. You wanted to ruin us." For a moment, the room went still again. I could hear my own heartbeat and the faint hum of Ivy's pen recorder. Then a quiet, steady voice came from the doorway. "No," Ivy said, stepping into view, her heels clicking softly against the wood. In her hand, she held a white envelope embossed with the county seal. "You ruined yourself, Claire Caldwell." And now, she added, handing over the document, "the court will hear your part." Claire froze, her sobs caught in her throat. Phoebe took a step back, her bravado collapsing into stunned silence. The weight of what Ivy held the official subpoena for federal indictment seemed to drain the air from the room. I rose slowly, looking at them both. "You wanted power," I said quietly. "Now you'll learn what real power feels like when it finally answers you back." The knock at the door came like a drumbeat, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ivy rose, opened the door, and two uniformed officers stepped inside, their expressions firm and professional. The room fell silent except for the rustle of papers as one officer unfolded a document and read aloud, his voice echoing through the house like a verdict. "By order of the district court, this warrant authorizes the arrest of Claire Caldwell and Phoebe Caldwell for investigation under charges of elder financial abuse and felony theft." Claire gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Phoebe took a step back, eyes darting toward the door as if she might still run. But it was too late. The other officer moved closer, producing handcuffs that gleamed under the afternoon light. Claire shook her head in disbelief, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Please, this is a mistake." "I didn't mean—" The officer's tone remained calm. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." Phoebe's purse slipped from her hand and landed on the floor with a dull thud. One officer bent down to collect it, opening it carefully to log its contents. Inside, among the scattered receipts and makeup, lay a small leather notebook. He flipped it open and froze. On the lined pages, written in neat cursive, was a list of numbers, dates, and dollar amounts. At the top, one line read, "Division of proceeds, 70% Claire, 30% Phoebe." The officer looked up, his expression turning grave. "Ma'am," he said quietly, holding up the notebook, "is this your handwriting?" Phoebe's lips trembled, but no words came out. Claire looked away, her tears falling freely now. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind of silence that signals the end of pretending. Peter stood near the staircase, frozen. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide and hollow. The reality before him, the mother-in-law he had once defended, the wife he had once loved, was unraveling in front of him. One confession, one handcuff, one cruel truth at a time. As the officers read them their rights, Claire began to sob uncontrollably, begging for understanding while Phoebe stood stiff, her pride cracking into pieces. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed through the room like punctuation marks to a story finally ending. I watched it all without a word. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Some endings do not need noise. They only need truth. Peter's shoulders trembled. He turned to me slowly, eyes glistening with disbelief and grief. I placed my hand over my teacup, steady as stone. I taught my son to be honest all his life, I said quietly. And now you see, Peter, deceit always burns itself in the end. The air outside felt heavy with the kind of silence that follows a storm. Not peace, but consequence. The officers moved with quiet precision, reading the final lines of the warrant, as Claire stood trembling, her wrists drawn together in cold silver cuffs. Her eyes were swollen, her hair tangled, her voice gone. All that remained was a whisper of shame. Tears streaked her cheeks as she looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Behind her, Phoebe shouted through her own panic, her voice breaking into raw desperation. "I only wanted to protect my daughter," she screamed, struggling against the officer's steady grip. But no one answered. The echo of her words died against the walls like a plea too late to matter. The door opened, and the afternoon light poured in sharp, unforgiving. As the police led them out, the sound of murmurs rippled across the front yard. Neighbors had gathered at the end of the driveway, drawn by the flashing red and blue lights that painted the street in restless color. They whispered to each other, faces pale with disbelief. To them, the Caldwells had always been charming, refined, the perfect family. Now they watched that illusion collapse in handcuffs. Phoebe stumbled as they guided her toward the car. Claire followed, shoulders shaking the weight of her choices, pressing down harder than the metal around her wrists. When the patrol car door shut, the sound was final, a hollow click that seemed to close a chapter none of us would ever forget. I stood by the doorway, my hands folded neatly in front of me. The flashing lights reflected on the window pane, washing my face in waves of red and blue. For months, I had imagined this moment, the balance tipping back to justice, the truth stepping into daylight. Yet now, as it unfolded, I felt no triumph, only calm, only the stillness that comes when the truth no longer hides. Ivy stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "You did it, Beth," she said. "Every piece of evidence held up. It's all legal, all airtight. They can't escape this." I turned to her, my expression serene. "I didn't want to win," I said quietly. "I just wanted the truth to be seen." She nodded, her hand resting gently on my shoulder, understanding the weight in my words. Outside, the patrol car pulled away, its lights fading down the street. The neighbors slowly dispersed, their whispers drifting into silence. I took one last sip of my tea, still warm despite the chaos. The taste was calm and honest, like the truth itself. Justice at last was not a word in theory. It was something you could hear, feel, and see, written in the firm lines of an official verdict. When the case of the state versus Claire Caldwell and Phoebe Caldwell was called in court, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Ivy stood beside me, calm and steady, a stack of neatly organized evidence resting in her arms. Every video, every transaction log, every page from my journal, the truth had been gathered piece by piece, and now it stood before the law. The prosecutor's voice carried through the room as the evidence was presented. The footage of Claire whispering in front of the swinging silver pendant, the video of her opening my safe, the bank statements showing every withdrawal down to the last cent. And finally, the handwritten notebook that divided the stolen money, 70% for Claire, 30% for Phoebe. There were no words left to twist, no story left to tell. The truth was louder than any defense they could invent. Claire sat rigid in her seat, her once smooth composure fractured into raw panic. Phoebe beside her stared at the floor, lips moving in silent prayers that went unanswered. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. The courtroom erupted with quiet murmurs as the charges were read aloud. Claire Caldwell, guilty of grand theft, elder financial abuse, and unlawful psychological manipulation. Phoebe Caldwell, guilty of conspiracy and aiding in financial fraud. Phoebe's eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. Claire gripped the edge of the table, trembling, her face drained of color. Peter, sitting at the back of the courtroom, looked hollow, as if part of him had crumbled along with the illusion of his marriage. After the verdict, he approached me, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said. "I should have listened." I touched his arm gently. "Now you see what truth costs," I said, "and what lies destroy." When it was Claire's turn to speak before sentencing, she suddenly stood, her voice rising above the murmurs. "You destroyed my life," she screamed, tears streaking down her face. "You took everything from me." I met her gaze, my voice calm but cold as glass. "No, Claire," I said. "You destroyed your own life the moment you traded your conscience for money." Her words faltered. The room fell silent again as the judge delivered the final sentence: 5 years in federal prison for Claire, 2 for Phoebe, and full restitution of the stolen assets. As the officers led them away, I felt no triumph, only the quiet weight of closure. Justice had spoken. Karma had simply collected its debt. A few months passed. The house by the coast had returned to its quiet rhythm, the sound of waves brushing the shore, the faint creak of wood when the wind moved through the porch. I sat by the window, the afternoon light spilling across my desk, my pen gliding across a fresh page. The title at the top read, "The Hypnotist's Lie." It wasn't just a novel anymore. It was a confession, a warning, and perhaps a way to let go. Every word I wrote felt like a small exhale of something I had carried too long. I paused to look outside. The tulips I had planted last spring were blooming again, red, yellow, and white, bright enough to remind me that life continues even after deceit. As I watched them sway gently in the breeze, a car pulled into the driveway. Peter stepped out holding a bouquet of tulips, the same color as those in my garden. He stood by the door for a moment, unsure if he should come in. I smiled faintly and gestured toward the kitchen. "You remembered," I said softly. He nodded, setting the flowers on the table. "Tulips mean honesty," he said quietly. "I thought they belonged here." We sat together for a while, not as mother and son divided by betrayal, but as two people learning how to rebuild trust without words. He looked at me, eyes filled with remorse. "I still don't know how you forgave me," he whispered. I closed my notebook, resting my hand on his. "Forgiveness isn't for them," I said gently. "It's for us, because we deserve peace, not bitterness." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The waves outside kept their steady rhythm. The air smelled faintly of salt and paper. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized that healing wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, patient, like the tide coming back to shore after a storm. Later that evening, I placed the tulips in a vase beside my desk and returned to my writing. The final line of my chapter came easily, as if it had been waiting all along. Old age isn't weakness, it's the clarity earned from every betrayal. And as I typed the last word, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not victory, but peace. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, share your story. Justice may be silent, but it never sleeps.